Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pentester Academy webinar. I'm Andrea Donlevy, and I will be your host during this cast. In just a few moments, we will go to John Cosgrove, Team Lead of Solutions Engineering at Distil Networks, who will be discussing real-time bot detection and management. John cut his teeth in enterprise IT before joining Distil in the mission to protect sites from abusive automated traffic. Today, you'll find him leading Distil's solutions engineering team, advising on the best architecture for his prospects' environments. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them in a chat window to all panelists. Questions will be held until the end of the webinar during our Q&A portion, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can with the time provided. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. It looks like we're just about ready, so I'll hand it over to John. Hey, John. We're ready to get started.
Hey, Andrea. Thanks so much. Guys, my name again is John Cosgrove, talking to you today from Distil Networks. And we're going to cover real-time bot detection and management today. It is a great topic that's on the news a lot. We're going to deep dive into a couple of different use cases and show some demos. So really want to kick off with the state of web application security today and just reinforce the point that we're going to talk about HTTP, so web apps. We're not going to talk about email. We're not going to talk about fat clients on the desktop, legacy terminals. We're just focusing on the web today. And so if you go out and you look at what the analysts are saying, analysts like Gartner, they're talking about how security tools are converging together. A lot of services out there used to be standalone point solutions for DDoS, for WAF, API gateways, app shielding, CASBs. Here, we've got bot management. And one thing is you're starting to see bot management more in these converged security solutions. But where exactly are we seeing it? And for the most part, it's being included in web application firewalls. And what the analysts are also saying is how WAFs are protecting more and more applications today. But I need to make it very clear that WAFs and bot management are really two different solutions right now. The WAF was created to address that kind of OWASP top 10 abuse list with cross-site scripting and SQL injections. It's for code exploits. But with bots, they're really abusing your application. And there's no real signature for them to draw in on and alert on. Gartner's saying how web application firewalls are going to cover more services. And PCI compliance today mandates that WAFs be in effect. But again, WAFs and bot mitigation is two different things. The WAFs out there today, Gartner recognizes that they're just not up to par. And a lot of the bot solutions out there are actually ineffective and non-existent. But at Distil, bots are all we do. We have a giant global network protecting thousands of domains. And every year, we compile statistics on what we see on our global network. This year's report covered traffic data from calendar year 2017, and we did see some changes from years past. There was 9.5% increase in the total number of bad bots in terms of all traffic, and the good bots increased as well. So what that means is that there's fewer humans visiting your site. This is an average number. So if you're out there listening today, working in a vertical like online gaming or airlines, maybe payments or finance, there's a lot more value behind your site than, say, someone like a directory or a classified site. And so you're going to actually have way more than 21.8% or the average number of bad bots on your site. So end of the day, you've got more bot traffic, you've got more malicious bot traffic. What in the world are they doing? Well, depending on the vertical, some are more prone to abuse than others. And again, we're really talking about abuse here, not so much an exploit or something like that. But lots of sites out there share common characteristics. things like a login or a checkout or valuable information that you have that your competitors don't. And so bots are out there perpetrating this abuse. Account takeover attacks. I think a lot of people viewing today have familiarity with a website called Have I Been Pwned, run by security researcher Troy Hunt. It's a great resource for staying up to date on the latest account breaches and general security and checking you or your organization's email addresses for past data leakage. But if you imagine a leak with 250 million usernames and passwords, if somebody wanted to take advantage of that, they can't type that fast. So you're going to have to write software to try those 250 million usernames and passwords across the top 1,000 websites to find which ones are hits and misses if you really wanted that data. So you're going to have to write a bot to do it if you want to do it this century. Other sites are going to have prices that are specific and unique to your own. And if your competitors could undercut your prices by 3 cents every time you updated yours, you'd be at a competitive disadvantage. Well, guess what? That's how bots take advantage of different retailers out there. If you want to update your prices in real time, you're going to have automation to do it. And third, on card cracking and carding here, if you have a checkout on your site, I don't know if you guys saw the article, I think it was published last year by some security researchers who wrote a botnet and found a lot of websites actually allowed you to submit a Visa card payment without putting in the zip code or the CVV number correctly. So they would decline the card transaction if the CVV or the zip code was incorrect, but they would let you at least submit and try those numbers. So they built a distributed botnet attacking lots of different sites, and they were able to, given a credit card number, come up with a valid zip code and valid CVV code in less than 10 seconds. It was really, really amazing work, but just showing you the power of what a high-scale, sophisticated botnet is able to achieve. On the right side, API abuse. These are really those APIs that are anonymous that help maybe drive your website or your native mobile app. A lot of times those are underprotected. And I think with the inclusion of underprotected APIs on the OWASP top 10 list recently, it just goes to show you another vector for bots to take advantage of. And then lastly, denial of service. These aren't the DDoS attacks that I mentioned earlier. These are when bots are so greedy, they can overwhelm your system, bring it to its knees, and result in a poor experience for your end users. So if any of these things sound familiar, if you're dealing with any of this on a day-to-day basis, chances are that you have bots on your site taking advantage of you. So again, content and price scraping is a big one. Account takeover and fraud, another big one. And these are the two that I want to do demos on today. So I've got some simple bots that are going to run from my laptop, but it's not a stretch to spin them up on cloud infrastructure or peer-to-peer proxy network APIs, and then have them highly, highly distributed over 10,000 different IP addresses and many, many different user agents. So traditional attempts at, say, rate limiting or CAPTCHA or looking at logs after the fact are really reactive and lead to a lot of false positives. These bots are evolving and changing shape much faster than traditional security tools can keep up with. And things like DDoS protection, those are for volumetric attacks, SYN flood, that sort of thing. And the WAF, like I mentioned earlier, totally for coding exploits and known signature attack patterns. There's nothing technically wrong with these bot requests that are coming in. It's simply abuse. So at the end of the day, you've got bots evolving, and they could be very advanced and are very much persistent because there's something that your business has that the bot operator or the bot operator's client wants. Over the years of doing that bad bot report, we've noticed a definite trend in evolution of these bots. Simple ones came from desktops and data centers all around the world, but it was at least easy to say, well, I don't want any data center traffic on my website. Now we're getting to the point of peer-to-peer proxy lists that come from real residential ISPs, at least here in the US, and API and mobile bots that are both taking advantage of mobile phones in real people's pockets. So you have real mobile network carrier IPs coming in, you have real residential IP addresses coming in with requests that don't trip any of your traditional rule sets on your WAF. So how can you handle all this? I've got some ideas at the end, but I did want to dig into two of those use cases before we start. So let's start with the first one, web scraping, and a little bit more information on that. In our bad bot report, we broke down how many sites on our network had been affected by these threats. And we found that 97% of the sites were afflicted with web scrapers. In general, it's a simple bot, but remember the evolution aspect. So if you block it, you start a game of cat and mouse that can lead to taking up all your resources' time. So basically, everyone is subject to scraping, and it's easy to change your bot's user agent or come from proxy networks to try to get around any protection that you might put in place. It's also really simple to put out bids for work, and those bids are relatively cheap. So who's really behind it? I would say your competitors, definitely. You have other people in there as startups that are trying to shake up an industry, disrupt an industry, whether that's a financial startup, aggregating people's bank accounts and offering them new ways to slice and dice their data, or it might be a travel startup that's going out and scraping a bunch of fares and offering people new ways to look at that. Those types of bots can really bring your site to its knees or have user credentials out there in the wild. Certainly, you have people spoofing your own website with its content, with phishing attacks, but then you have the good guys too. So Google, Bing, Yahoo, those are the traditional scrapers that you don't want to block. If I had a penny for every WAF rule set that I've seen that simply whitelisted the string Googlebot, I'd be a multimillionaire. It's not an effective way to go about protecting your site from bots or protecting yourself from false positives. Bots can change their user agent all day long and even come from Google IP space with something like Google App Engine. So really you have to keep false positives, advanced bots, false negatives in mind when you try to think about this threat. But let's go to a quick demo. So I've got a folder of some Selenium scripts here, and what we'll do is we'll do a quick web scraping demo of a site, a demo site that we have called Trust Pages. It's a directory of healthcare information. And so we load up the zip code, and we're going to scrape the first 10 entries on the zip code page. And so here, my hands are off the keyboard. I'm not doing anything. And Python and Selenium are working together to run through all the doctors listed on the first page of the results for that zip code and scrape their name and phone number. What am I going to do with this data? I'm not going to do anything. It's just a demo. But you can look at the potential here of the abuse or the data collection and how I'm using a real web browser, executing JavaScript, and running through the pages at a moderate rate. I'm not blowing up a firewall with 1,000 requests per second, and I'm not just simply using curl to go and get the data. So it's going to be kind of tough to spot this with your traditional security tools. The script itself isn't that complicated. This is the last page of stuff it's running through, but I wrote it in Python with the help of Selenium. So let's look at the code and see exactly how you do this. There's only 40 or so lines. I'll go ahead and let this finish. Great. So inside the code here have some wrapped lines, but it's pretty simple. So we import Selenium. We set up an array for zip codes, loop through those zip codes with the URL parameter and the search result. And then we're sweeping for random intervals intermittently here to make sure that we stay under a rate limit. And you can adjust these as you need to maybe make your requests appear more natural instead of programmatically hitting the site every 2 seconds. So we grab the entries on the page and you say, well, John, how do I do that? I'm not very good at web scraping. And I say, that's fine. There's a cool function called find element by XPath. And what's an XPath? If you load up your site, you right click, you go into inspect, and you say, well, I want to click that link. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to inspect that element on the page, come down here, right click, copy XPath. And now this string is on the clipboard and I can paste it into my Selenium script. The rest of the script is pretty straightforward. It clicks the link, finds the XPaths for the name and the phone number, and prints them out. And that goes through everything in nested for loops. And at the end of the day, you end up with a CSV output in your terminal of the data that you wanted. So that's web scraping. Kind of simple to do in 50 or so lines of Python, and easily accomplished in a weekend by a novice programmer. Let's talk about account takeovers next. These, I think, have the potential to be much more disastrous for your company and a data leak, and much more of a poor user experience should someone's credentials be compromised and used against them. This is also where more advanced bots show up. With the nature of testing usernames and passwords, you need to test millions of combinations. And so these bots typically are very, very distributed and hide themselves pretty well. Distil has actually created a threat research lab where we publish the findings of a lot of our analyst work. So we recently published the anatomy of account takeover attacks. And some interesting things about these are that whenever there's a breach, we definitely notice an increase in account takeover attacks of about 3x. And then even without a breach, the average website is probably subject to 2 to 3 ATOs every month. So you're at risk here as well. If you have a username and password login on your site, the potential is there to be abused by these advanced bots. So what else happens? People test run their bots. When I was writing those scripts, you better believe that I didn't write every line exactly right the first time. So there was a lot of testing going on. So you can look for that testing in your log. It's not necessarily going to be a perfect run every time. And if you can spot that, you might be able to put protection in place before that large-scale attack comes around. So even if you don't have Distil or a product like this, you can still go for some form of protection. The worst news might be that these bots typically attack on Fridays and Saturdays. You might guess that when people have more free time, but they're definitely ruining your weekends too. So be on the lookout, or maybe if you have to start somewhere, concentrate on your Friday and your Saturday traffic. So let's look at a demo of account takeover. Similarly, again, I'm going to use Python and Selenium against a WordPress install that I have in my lab. It's pretty simple, maybe even simpler than before. So it's going to load the username and password page, and try some combinations, printing out the results when it sees either a failure or a success. And so there were a couple failures. We saw that one success. And if you spotted it, we actually had to move the mouse a little bit inside the page once it was logged in to actually log out and continue with the script. So let's take a look at that script, exactly what it's doing. Like before, we import Selenium and Python, load the login page. This time I used a function called find element by ID. It can be a little bit more flexible than the XPath if the page changes. I'm loading in my array of usernames and passwords from a text file, and then trying them out. Sending the inputs, clicking the button, looking for dashboard in the text of the page that's returned. If we see dashboard, then we just got logged in. Similarly, you could check for HTTP status code or something like that if you were using a different framework. Log out if we did get logged in, and then print the resulting output to the terminal, and then let's sleep randomly again. So end of the day, you've got your CSV output of the account takeover script. All right, so that's account takeover. I did want to talk about how Distil counters these threats to give you guys a little taste of how we do it. We do approach things holistically. We look at our expertise as a competitive advantage. We pioneered the space about 7 or 8 years ago, and we understand the bot problem better than anyone else. All that time and that exposure to the market and the threats out there has allowed us to craft superior technology. We set lots of different traps for bots to fall into, and because of that, we have better false positive and better false negative rates. Lastly, we have a team of dedicated experts that helps our customers deal with these problems and manage them on a day-to-day basis. So you can offload your problem to us and go run your business. You don't need to be battling bots. That's our job. But how do we do it? The bot defense platform really is a platform. So it's one install, it's one deployment, but it has different pieces. So we first started with bot defense for web, and that allowed us to protect HTML pages, text HTML content, and the classic web pages that I think everyone is used to. But when APIs started to enter the scene and gain in popularity, people started writing single-page web apps or had other pieces of their site driven by, say, JSON content. And so we developed Bot Defense for Web API because we found that as soon as you stop the bots on the website at the front door, they just went around to the API or the back door and got the same data that they needed in an even easier format to access. No more finding elements by IDs or XPaths. These JSON APIs gave them structured data of exactly what they wanted. And then lastly, those API endpoints also started serving mobile apps. So we developed an SDK that's available to install inside your app that protects against automation there and abuse of that API endpoint by something that would not be your real mobile app. So there's these fingerprint icons on the slide here. What does that mean? So Distil actually does a few different things in how we look for automation on the web. We're looking at the connecting software, not just the IP address, not just the HTTP request itself, and we're validating, is that a human driving that software? So we do have a piece of JavaScript that we'll inject into pages in real time, and it's going to do a lot of different things for us. It's going to validate the browser, detect automated browsers, and generate a high-definition anonymous fingerprint. That high-definition fingerprint forms the basis of a lot of other checks that we do as well. We can include a proof of work in there and wrap everything in a tamper-proofing layer so that fraudsters can't just fake it. We'll look much deeper than just the connecting browser as well. So take the information we're gathering out of the user space and look at things on our end. We have multiple different machine learning models to gauge how sure we are of whether someone's interaction with a page and their mouse movements, their keyboard clicks, their thumb swipes on mobile, whether those are actually human or whether they look like automation. We keep all this in a known violators database so that we have a network effect. When we learn something on one customer, we're able to protect other customers with it. And finally, it's important to note that our rate limiting is based on these fingerprints. They're highly granular, globally unique, not just based on an IP address where you can get false positives in a situation of a company's VPN, a coffee shop, a library, something like that. We're not just a one-trick pony. We're doing all of this and continually getting better. It's all we do. And you say, John, I don't have Distil. I'm visiting your webinar, right? What can I do when I get off this webinar to go and look for bots, approach this threat? Now what? Well, like I mentioned earlier, you can look for those spikes in traffic, but I would recommend dividing your requests down in your dashboards to different URLs. Get really granular here and set up alerting on each one individually. When account takeover attacks are in, you're going to see a higher failure rate. Make sure you have alerting on that high failure rate. And then if you've divided your request down into segments, say based on user agents, IP addresses, IP organizations, you can get a better sense of what's going on and maybe use your WAF or use your firewall to implement some form of crude action to help mitigate the threat. One thing that I didn't cover specifically, but here we can talk about it, is gift cards. So stored value, just like a credit card, but maybe even not as well protected. Maybe there's a PIN, it's probably only 4 digits. And this is rife with abuse that we've seen across our network. So if you have a gift card path out there in e-commerce, make sure that that's instrumented with alerts on its own, for sure. And you have a dashboard on it. I mean, advanced bots are hard to catch, but I think it's possible with vigilance to a point. But I think also you guys have other stuff to do besides worrying about bots, right? One thing that can help with account takeovers is monitoring for the data breaches that happen. I'm sure you're going to see them in the news, but that site that I mentioned earlier, haveibeenpwned.com, has a good list of account breaches on it. And you can also search for you or your organization email addresses to see if your account details have been shared out there in one of these breaches. Lastly, check out the Distil Threat Research Lab. So there's lots of different reports that cover those different use cases that I mentioned earlier in the webinar. So the 2018 Bad Bot report's out there, anatomy of account takeover attacks, and certainly how we've seen bots evolve over time. All that is at www.distilnetworks.com.
All right, thank you, John. And it looks like we received a couple questions during your presentation. As a reminder, feel free to submit your questions via chat. We'll do the best to get to all the questions that we can. So let's jump right in. The first question, why can't I just use a CAPTCHA to stop bots?
Yeah, Andrea, it's a good question, and it's certainly a simple approach, but there are a few reasons. I think, notwithstanding, everybody realizes that people hate CAPTCHAs. You don't want to serve a CAPTCHA if you don't have to. And I know a while ago, Distil worked with a company to do a study on it. We saw, especially on mobile, conversions got reduced, I think up to 25%. And so you don't want to just serve CAPTCHAs to everyone. In fact, it's Distil's goal to really sort of never serve a CAPTCHA to a real person. We want to get our false positive rate down as low as we can, and that's what we end up doing in practice. And conversely, we always want to serve CAPTCHAs to bots or whatever the threat protection level is that our customer has chosen. So yeah, first thing, people just, you simply don't like them and they reduce conversions. And then secondly, actually, maybe more pertinently, is that there are CAPTCHA solving services out there. And so if CAPTCHA is your only defense and someone really wants to get at the data or try out the account list on your site, they can sign up for a CAPTCHA solving service. We use a hardened CAPTCHA that isn't as available on those CAPTCHA solving services. And separately, if we do see that abuse start up and we think that maybe the CAPTCHA solving service is in play, we can take some kind of anti-CAPTCHA farm approaches on our CAPTCHAs as we serve them out. And then, of course, we have an analyst team as well. So that analyst team can ramp up the threat responses specifically against the bots that we're seeing attempt to solve CAPTCHAs. So I'd say, number one, they reduce conversions. Number two, they get solved anyway. So you really need a broader, more specific tool to combat that automated bot threat.
Okay. And can you give more information on the mobile app protection?
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned that it has an SDK component to it, but I do want to make sure that everyone's clear. The traffic still flows through the Distil Bot Defense platform. And the SDK, when it's installed in the application, does a couple different things. So like the JavaScript on the website that I mentioned, the SDK in the mobile app does forms of automation detection. So emulators, device farms, debuggers, jailbroken devices, we can flag on all those different characteristics if we see it when we challenge the device. And the second thing that the SDK does is it manages tokens on your behalf. So we're going to generate, encrypt, and track on these sort of ephemeral tokens that must be used to interact with Distil and thus your API endpoint. So you can't fake it with an emulator. You can't fake it with a script. You have to have the real app running on a real device. That's how we approach mobile.
Okay. And how does Distil deploy the service?
Oh yeah, great question. So Bot Defense platform, how do you actually get the platform, right? We like to say we are deployment agnostic. And what does that mean? It means that across all the thousands of possible environments you could have out there, there is a very high chance that you can install Distil in it. You could keep us completely outside your environment. So one way to do that would be by using our secure CDN that we host ourselves and pointing traffic to it, and then we send clean traffic your way. You could also install us in the many different cloud service providers out there. So certainly everyone's familiar with Amazon Web Services, but you could also use Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or if you're out, say, in China, the Aliyun Cloud, Alibaba's cloud. You'd install a couple new compute instances, throw a load balancer in front of it, and then the Distil software can run on those new compute instances and clean the traffic before it hits your origin. And then lastly, similar to that cloud deployment, you can install us in an on-premise existing data center that you have today. So we integrate behind all of the major load balancers, NetScalers, F5s, HA Proxy, Nginx. all of those are compatible with the way that Distil routes requests. So similarly, standing up new virtual machines or physical machines, we'd install the Distil software on them. Requests would flow through the load balancer to us first, and then we would pass on that clean traffic to you. So whether you are in the cloud, whether you want to use our cloud, or whether you need to integrate on-prem, we have a solution for you.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss bot mitigation and the Distil Research Lab reports.
For sure, Andrea. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. If you still have a few questions for John or would like to learn more, head over to distilnetworks.com or email contact@distilnetworks.com. You may also watch a demo and interviews with Distil on our Pentester Academy TV blog or YouTube channel. This webcast is brought to you by Pentester Academy, the leader in online cybersecurity education. Join over 10,000 professionals from more than 90 countries to learn security online. To learn more, go to pentesteracademy.com. We hope to see you at the next Pentester Academy webinar.